My name is Sophia, and if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that some bonds run deeper than words can explain. Growing up in Willow Ridge, a quiet little town where life moves at its own slow pace, there wasn't always a lot happening. But there was one part of my world that always felt full, always felt meaningful, and that was Titan, my Great Dane. I still remember the day we brought him home like it was yesterday. I was 15, right in that awkward phase where nothing quite made sense and everything felt a little uncertain. My parents had always been supportive, but they worked long hours, and as an only child, I often felt the weight of the quiet. I used to beg them for a dog for months, convinced that it would fill the gap I didn't know how to name at the time. Finally, after much pleading, they agreed, and we drove out to a breeder just outside of town. There were all kinds of puppies running around, tumbling over each other, full of energy. But my eyes landed on one, this large, gentle-looking Great Dane pup with soft, dark eyes and floppy ears that seemed too big for his head. He wasn't the loudest or the most playful, but something about him drew me in right away. I knew without a doubt that he was the one. My parents were hesitant at first, unsure if I understood the responsibility that came with a dog of his size and breed, but I promised them I was ready. And from the moment Titan came home with us, everything changed. He quickly became the center of my world. Those first few weeks were a blur of training, early mornings, and lots of chewed-up shoes. But I loved every minute of it. Titan wasn't just a pet. He felt like a part of me, as if we understood each other without needing to speak. He grew fast, faster than I could have imagined. In no time at all, he transformed from a clumsy pup into this towering, graceful creature who turned heads everywhere we went. But despite his size, he always had this calm, gentle energy about him. He followed me everywhere. Whether I was pacing through the house, sitting outside reading, or lying on my bed late at night. There was something steady in the way he was always close, always watching, always quietly present. I talked to him like he was a person, telling him things I never said out loud to anyone else. Silly thoughts, worries about school, little frustrations, even dreams I didn't know if I believed in. He'd sit there, listening, his big brown eyes focused like he understood every word. Over time, it became clear that Titan wasn't just there to fill empty space. He grounded me. Whenever I felt anxious or overwhelmed, all it took was a quiet moment sitting next to him, running my fingers through his fur, feeling his steady breathing beside me, and everything seemed a little easier to handle. He had this way of making me feel safe, like nothing bad could reach me as long as he was close. I relied on him in ways I didn't even realize. Whether it was walking through Willow Ridge's winding trails, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, or curling up together on rainy days, Titan was always part of my life. There wasn't a moment where I doubted his loyalty, his calm presence always there to catch me when things felt uncertain. Even my parents noticed how close we were, often teasing that Titan was like my shadow. But it didn't bother me. In fact, it made me feel less alone. The older I got, the more I understood that people come and go, life shifts and moves on. But Titan was this constant, always steady, always mine. He wasn't just a dog, he was family, the kind of companion that feels like they've been there forever, even if only a few years have passed. It wasn't until later that I realized how much I'd come to depend on him emotionally. Whenever life felt messy, whenever friendships faded or plans fell apart, Titan was there, always the same, always reminding me that love could be simple, uncomplicated, and unwavering. I couldn't imagine life without him, couldn't picture waking up and not having him curled at the foot of my bed or walking alongside me through the quiet streets of Willow Ridge. Titan had been with me through so many milestones, birthdays, school dances, late-night worries about the future. and every moment we shared only strengthened the bond I felt with him. It felt natural, effortless. He was the one who kept me grounded when everything else felt uncertain. Little did I know that bond, as deep and comforting as it was, would be tested in ways I never expected. It started out like any normal day, one of those quiet afternoons where everything feels still and predictable. My parents had left early that morning to visit some relatives out of town, giving me the house all to myself. Normally, I would have seen it as a chance to relax, to enjoy the calm without any interruptions. Titan and I had the whole place to ourselves, and that always felt like a little gift. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels comforting, not lonely. I'd made myself a cup of tea, put on some random show in the background, something light and silly I didn't need to pay attention to, and curled up on the couch with Titan stretched out nearby. It was peaceful, easy. The kind of afternoon where you could just zone out, not thinking much at all. Titan had been lying close, his head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed, completely at ease. I absent-mindedly reached down now and then to scratch behind his ears or rub his back, not even needing to say anything. We'd spent so many afternoons like that, just enjoying the quiet together, no pressure, no expectations. But something shifted. At first, I didn't notice it. The TV kept flickering. The rain had started tapping softly against the window, and I felt like I could drift off without a care in the world. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Titan move. He went from completely relaxed to suddenly alert, his head lifting, ears perked, body tensing. It wasn't like when he heard a squirrel outside or someone walking past the house. This felt different. It was like all his focus had snapped into place, zeroed in on something unseen. I sat up a little, glancing over at him, wondering what had caught his attention. He was staring at the front door, eyes sharp, unblinking. I followed his gaze, but of course I couldn't see or hear anything unusual. I called his name softly, expecting him to relax again, but he didn't even look at me. His body language was different, more intense, like he'd made some decision I wasn't part of yet. Without a sound, he got up and walked purposefully toward the door. I felt my brow furrow, a strange little knot forming in my chest. Titan reached the door and, without hesitation, used his paw to push it shut, the soft click echoing louder than it should have in the quiet house. I didn't move, didn't speak right away. I just sat there, confused, watching him as he turned back toward me. But when his eyes met mine, something about his expression made my stomach flutter. It wasn't the usual look of curiosity or excitement. There was something deeper, something intense. His eyes seemed to shimmer, almost glowing in the dim light of the room, and for a second, it felt like he was trying to tell me something important. I couldn't place what it was, but whatever it was, it made my pulse quicken. Before I could process it, Titan started moving toward me, his steps purposeful, heavy, but quiet. My breath caught, and I found myself frozen, unsure of what was happening, but unable to look away. It felt like the space between us had shifted, like the air had grown heavier somehow. Titan reached me in a few quick strides, and, without hesitation, he jumped up, his large frame pinning me gently but firmly against the couch. My heart thudded hard in my chest. It wasn't rough or aggressive. It was like he had to make sure I stayed still, like he needed me to understand something. His eyes locked onto mine, and the intensity in his gaze made everything else fade away. The TV, the soft rain outside, the stillness of the house, all of it blurred into the background. It was just him and me, caught in this strange, focused moment. I couldn't speak. I could barely move. I didn't feel scared exactly, but I was overwhelmed, unsure of what to think or how to react. It was like being pulled into something I couldn't name, something that felt bigger than either of us. Time felt like it slowed down, stretching thin around us. I could feel the warmth of his body, his breath steady and calm, but his eyes kept that same sharp focus, never wavering. It was almost like he was waiting for me to catch up, to realize something he already knew. My mind raced, questions swirling, but no clear answers forming. I didn't know what had triggered the change in him, why he had suddenly gone from calm and familiar to intense and deliberate. All I knew was that whatever was happening between us in that moment felt important, like a turning point, even if I couldn't fully understand it yet. After a few long seconds, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, Titan finally shifted his weight, his eyes softening slightly, and stepped back. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, my heart still beating fast, my hands trembling slightly. He sat down in front of me, his gaze still locked on mine, but the intensity had softened, replaced by something quieter, almost reassuring. I reached out instinctively, running my hand over his fur, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of what just happened. But Titan didn't move away. He stayed close, his posture relaxed but watchful, like he was still waiting, still holding on to something unspoken. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted permanently, something I didn't have the words for yet. That moment lingered in the air, hanging over us like a quiet secret. I knew, deep down, that things weren't the same anymore, even if I couldn't explain why. Titan's behavior had changed, and whatever that meant, I had a feeling it was only the beginning of something I hadn't yet fully understood. After that strange afternoon with Titan, something inside me shifted, though I couldn't quite explain it, not even to myself. It wasn't just that he'd acted differently, alert, focused, intense. It was how that moment stayed with me long after the house had settled back into its usual quiet. I went about my day like normal, cleaning up around the house, scrolling through my phone, pretending like everything was the same. But it wasn't. I kept catching myself thinking back to the way he looked at me, how deliberate his movements had been, how I'd felt frozen in place, not out of fear, but because I genuinely didn't know how to process it. For a while, I tried to brush it off. Maybe Titan had just been restless. Maybe there was a sound outside I hadn't noticed. Something simple that had made him act out of character. But every time I looked at him after that, something in my chest tightened. It felt like there was this quiet understanding hanging between us, something neither of us knew how to put into words. I kept watching him closer than before, noticing little things I might have missed. How he seemed to follow me from room to room a bit more carefully. How his eyes lingered on me like he was reading something in my face. Something deeper. It was subtle. Nothing anyone else would notice. But I felt it. The air around us felt charged in a way it hadn't before, like there was always something unsaid. At night, when the house was dark and quiet, and I was lying in bed, Titan would curl up in his usual spot near the foot of the bed, his breathing steady. But I found myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over, the way his eyes had locked onto mine, how still everything had felt except for my racing heart. And I couldn't shake this confusing swirl of emotions rising up inside me. It wasn't fear, exactly. I never felt unsafe around Titan. It was something else entirely, something that made me feel both drawn to him and unsure of myself at the same time. I started wondering if maybe I'd been leaning on him more than I realized. He'd always been there for me, ever since we brought him home. Through every phase of my life, every up and down, Titan had been the one constant. Whenever I felt lonely or overwhelmed, it was him I turned to, without even thinking twice. He'd never judged, never asked for more. He was just there, steady and present. But now, after that strange day, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe the bond I felt with him had grown into something more complex than I'd been willing to admit. I'd catch myself glancing at him when he wasn't looking, wondering if he sensed the change too. Some days, I'd try to go about things like normal. Walks through Willow Ridge, sitting on the porch, curling up on the couch with him by my side. But even in those quiet moments, I could feel it, lingering under the surface. It was this pull, a closeness that felt heavier, like it carried something unspoken between us. Part of me wanted to shake it off, to convince myself I was overthinking. After all, he was my dog, my loyal companion, nothing more. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the way my heart seemed to race a little faster when his eyes met mine now, how the air felt different when it was just the two of us. It wasn't just about affection anymore. It felt like we were tiptoeing towards something I couldn't quite name. And that left me feeling conflicted, unsure if I was reading too much into it or if something really had shifted. I found myself avoiding eye contact with him at times, not because I was scared, but because the intensity of it stirred up feelings I didn't know how to deal with. There were moments when I wanted to bury it, pretend like things hadn't changed. But the truth was, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new and unfamiliar. The bond I had always counted on, the easy comfort, now felt layered with emotions I hadn't prepared for. I started questioning myself. Was I imagining it? Had I gotten too used to leaning on Titan that I blurred the lines in my own mind? Or was there something more to the connection between us? Something neither of us could control? The uncertainty tugged at me constantly, leaving me feeling both grateful for him and overwhelmed by the weight of it all. I didn't have answers, and the longer it went on, the more I felt like I was caught in this quiet storm, unsure of how to move forward. Titan never wavered. He stayed close, patient, loyal, just like always. But now, every glance, every quiet moment we shared felt filled with more meaning, more intensity than before. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. How could I even begin to explain something I barely understood myself? All I knew was that the bond between us was shifting, deepening in a way I wasn't ready to face, and I had no idea what it meant or where it would lead. It was a sunny morning, the kind that usually made me feel like everything in the world was a little lighter. The sky was clear, the air had that fresh crispness, and the quiet streets of Willow Ridge seemed to glow under the soft light. I'd decided to take Titan out for a walk, something we'd always done on weekends, our little routine. He loved these walks through Maplewood Park, and honestly, so did I. It was one of the few places where things felt simple, where we could both relax, just wandering through the paths without worrying about anything else. That morning felt no different at first. Titan trotted along beside me, his leash loose in my hand. His ears perked up as he sniffed at every tree and patch of grass like it was his first time seeing them. I watched him closely, still thinking about the strange shift in him over the past few weeks, how his eyes seemed to hold something deeper lately, how I felt this lingering sense that something had changed between us. But for a while, everything felt normal, peaceful even. We passed a few other people walking their dogs, exchanged polite nods, nothing unusual. I was just starting to let my thoughts drift when it happened. Titan suddenly froze, his body going completely still, his gaze locked on something ahead. It was so sudden that it jolted me out of my thoughts. I followed his line of sight, scanning the path ahead, and that's when I saw her. A female Great Dane, golden-colored, standing with her owner a little ways down the trail. She was beautiful, sleek, and graceful, her coat almost shining in the sunlight. But it wasn't her appearance that struck me. It was Titan's reaction. I felt the tension in the leash immediately as he shifted his weight forward, his muscles tightening. His eyes were glued to her, unblinking, his ears perked, his whole posture alert and focused in a way I hadn't seen before. He wasn't barking, wasn't pulling aggressively, but there was something intense about the way he stood, like he was completely captivated. I instinctively tightened my grip on the leash, calling his name softly, hoping to break whatever spell had suddenly come over him. But he didn't even flick an ear in my direction. It was like I wasn't even there. My stomach twisted a little as I tried again, firmer this time. Titan, come on. Still nothing. His gaze never left her. And then, without warning, he surged forward. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance, scrambling to keep hold of the leash as Titan pulled with a strength I hadn't expected. My heart jumped into my throat as I tried to stop him, calling his name louder now, my voice rising with panic. But it was like he was on autopilot, driven by something I couldn't understand. He wasn't being aggressive. He didn't bark, didn't growl. But there was this determined energy in him, something almost desperate. The other dog's owner must have sensed something too, because they quickly tugged their dog to the side, giving us space. I kept trying to hold Titan back, feeling the strain in my arms, my breath quickening. I didn't know what scared me more, his strength or the fact that he wasn't responding to me at all. Finally, after what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, Titan slowed. He hesitated just for a moment, his body still tense. Then, slowly, he turned his head back toward me, and the look in his eyes made my heart drop. There was something almost guilty there, something soft and sad, like he realized I'd been calling him the whole time but couldn't pull himself away. It felt like there was a distance between us in that moment, something unspoken but heavy, something I didn't know how to bridge. I swallowed hard, giving the leash a gentle tug, trying to steady myself, trying to act like everything was fine. But inside, my chest felt tight. We turned back toward the direction of home, Titan walking beside me now, quieter, slower, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. He didn't glance up at me like he usually did, didn't wag his tail or pause to sniff at every tree. It was like he was deep in thought, or maybe just weighed down by something neither of us could name. The walk back felt longer than usual. The sunlight that had felt warm and easy earlier now seemed too bright, almost harsh. I kept glancing down at him, hoping to catch that familiar spark in his eyes, but it wasn't there. I didn't say much. I couldn't. My thoughts were too jumbled, questions swirling in my head. Why had he acted like that? Why hadn't he listened? Why did I feel like a stranger walking beside him now? I tried to tell myself it was just instinct, just one of those moments dogs have when they fixate on something. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't like Titan. It felt bigger, heavier, like something had been building up inside him, and that moment at the park had cracked it open. And the worst part was, I didn't know what to do about it. When we finally reached home, Titan followed me inside quietly, not pulling ahead like he usually did, not looking back over his shoulder. He settled down in his usual spot, head resting on his paws, his eyes distant. I sat down across from him, trying to shake off the unease, but it clung to me, thick and heavy. The bond we'd shared for so long, the easy closeness I'd come to rely on, suddenly felt fragile, like it had been tested in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't know if it was something I could fix, or if it was something that would keep growing, this quiet, widening gap between us. But I knew one thing for sure. The connection we'd always had wasn't quite the same anymore. and I wasn't sure how to get it back. A few weeks after that strange day in the park with Titan, I got the news. It came in the form of a plain envelope sitting on the kitchen counter, mixed in with the usual stack of mail, bills, flyers, nothing special. But when I spotted the return address stamped on it, my heart skipped a beat. It was from the university I had applied to months ago, the one far from Willow Ridge, in a city I'd never been to but had spent hours daydreaming about. My parents weren't home when I opened it, just me standing there in the quiet kitchen, Titan lying by the door like he always did. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the letter, scanning the words until my eyes landed on the one thing that mattered. You've been accepted. For a few seconds, I just stood there, not quite knowing how to feel. I should have been thrilled. This was what I had worked for, planned for, the next step everyone told me I was supposed to take. It was a new chapter, full of possibilities, a fresh start in a place where no one knew me, where I could figure out who I was supposed to be. But instead of excitement, I felt something heavy settle in my chest, something that made my throat tighten. I glanced over at Titan, who lifted his head slightly, eyes focused on me like he knew something important had happened. And in that moment, all I could think about was him. What this meant for him, for us. The idea of leaving home, leaving the life I'd always known, had never seemed real until that moment. And now that it was real, all I could think about was the bond we'd built over the years, how tightly woven Titan had become into every part of my daily life. Every walk, every quiet evening, every moment when I needed comfort, he was there. And now, the thought of packing up and stepping away from that, from him, felt like tearing something vital out of me. I knew, logically, that I couldn't stay here forever, that moving on was part of growing up. My parents were over the moon when they found out, already talking about dorm supplies and travel plans, excited for me to start this new chapter. I smiled along with them, nodded at the right times, but inside, that heaviness never left. The hardest part was knowing Titan wouldn't be coming with me. There were rules, housing restrictions, reasons I couldn't bring him. And as much as I tried to convince myself it was temporary, that I'd come back for visits, that he'd be fine with my parents, the truth felt sharper than that. Deep down, I knew things wouldn't be the same. The connection we shared couldn't be packed up and taken with me. I'd spent so long relying on him, leaning into the comfort of having him always nearby, that the idea of leaving him behind felt like stepping off a ledge without knowing where I'd land. I spent those last few weeks trying not to think about it too much. I went through the motions, shopping for supplies, filling out forms. But every night, Titan would curl up beside me like he always had, and I'd find myself running my hand over his back, memorizing the feel of his fur, the steady rhythm of his breathing. There were moments when he'd look at me, and I swore he understood exactly what was happening, like he could sense the change coming. He stuck closer than usual, trailing after me from room to room, resting his head on my lap when I sat down, watching me with those deep, knowing eyes. It made it even harder, the way he seemed to read me better than anyone else. The night before I was supposed to leave, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the house, Titan's breathing steady at the foot of the bed. My mind kept racing, filled with all the what-ifs and maybes. What if he missed me too much? What if he felt like I was abandoning him? What if the bond we had didn't survive the distance? I sat up quietly, careful not to wake anyone else, and reached out to him. He stirred, lifting his head, eyes locking onto mine in the dim light. I slid off the bed and sat down beside him, my fingers brushing gently through his fur. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, my voice catching a little. "I'm gonna miss you." He didn't move, didn't pull away, just watched me, calm and steady as always. And somehow, that made the ache in my chest even sharper. I stayed there for a long time, not saying much else, just sitting close, trying to soak up every bit of comfort I could. The next morning felt like walking through a fog. My parents bustled around, loading up the car, double-checking bags, talking about the drive. Titan sat by the door, his posture quiet, almost too still. When it was finally time to leave, I knelt down beside him one last time, wrapping my arms around his neck, burying my face in his fur. He stayed perfectly still, letting me hold him tight, his head resting gently against my shoulder. I didn't say much. I couldn't trust my voice. But I hoped he understood anyway. That no matter how far I went, how much life changed, the bond we shared wouldn't disappear. As we pulled away, I looked back to see him standing in the doorway, his eyes following the car until we turned the corner, and he was out of sight. And even though I was heading toward something new, toward a beginning I'd worked hard for, part of me felt like I was leaving a piece of myself behind. Titan had been there through every moment that mattered, grounding me, steadying me. Facing a new beginning without him by my side felt like learning how to breathe all over again. Settling into university life felt like stepping into a world that moved at an entirely different speed. Everything was new. The faces, the routines, the sheer energy of the place. People around me seemed excited, throwing themselves into classes, making friends, planning their futures like they'd been waiting for this their whole lives. And while part of me wanted to feel that excitement too, I couldn't ignore the part of me that felt like something was missing. Every time I walked back to my dorm room at night, the buzz of the day finally quieting down, my mind would drift back to Titan. I wondered what he was doing, if he still waited by the door like he used to, if he noticed the space beside him where I used to sit. I tried to push those thoughts aside during the day, keeping busy, filling my schedule. But at night, it always crept back in. The ache of leaving, the weight of knowing I wasn't there anymore. For so long, Titan had been the one steady presence in my life, the one I could turn to without having to explain myself. It didn't feel right, being in a place where no one knew that part of me, where no one understood the quiet, grounding role he'd played. The truth was, I missed him more than I could say. I missed the way he'd look at me, like he could see straight through whatever I was feeling. Missed the calm of sitting next to him, knowing that nothing needed to be said. There were moments when I felt guilty, like I'd left him behind, like I'd broken something unspoken between us. I kept wondering if he felt that too, if he noticed how different everything was without me there. But as the weeks passed, I also started to understand something I hadn't fully realized before. Leaving Titan wasn't just about physical distance. It was about learning how to stand on my own, about facing who I was without leaning so heavily on the comfort of someone else, even someone as loyal and loving as him. That realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, in little moments, when I navigated a new challenge by myself, when I found quiet in a crowded space, when I surprised myself by feeling strong in ways I hadn't before. I began to see that Titan had taught me how to be steady, how to find calm when the world felt chaotic. But now it was my turn to carry those lessons forward without needing him right there beside me. I still thought about him every day, still felt that ache when I remembered the way his eyes would follow me around the house, the way he'd settle beside me without needing anything more than my presence. But I also knew that holding on too tightly to what we had wasn't fair, to him or to me. Love, I realized, isn't about keeping someone tethered to you, no matter how deep the bond. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go, when to allow space for both of you to grow. It means trusting that the connection you've built doesn't disappear just because life pulls you in different directions. The more I let myself sit with that thought, the easier it became to breathe. I stopped seeing my leaving as a betrayal and started seeing it as a step both of us needed to take. Titan would always be a part of me, woven into who I was, but it was okay to move forward. It was okay to carry that love with me without clinging to the past. On one of my trips back home, I finally felt the shift. I walked through the door, expecting that familiar lump in my throat, but instead, when Titan bounded over to greet me, it felt like something had settled. He was still the same, tail wagging, eyes shining, but there was no heaviness between us, no unspoken sadness. Just joy, just love. And I realized then that he hadn't felt abandoned. He hadn't held on to the same guilt I had. He'd been okay, waiting, trusting that I'd come back. And in that moment, I understood that letting go didn't mean losing him. It meant honoring the bond we had by giving both of us room to keep living, to keep growing. Titan had been there for me through so much, teaching me loyalty, patience, the quiet strength of simply being present. And now, it was my turn to carry those lessons with me, wherever life took me. I hugged him tight that day, burying my face in his fur, not because I felt like I had to hold on, but because I wanted to. Because love doesn't disappear with distance. It changes, it stretches, but it stays. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant moving forward with gratitude, knowing that no matter where I went, the bond we shared would always be part of me, steady and unshaken. And that, I realized, was enough.